I think he was a pioneer. I remember seeing a picture of him backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, and it's from the 1920s, and there's just an all-white cast with one African-American man amidst everyone, and that really struck me, and I didn't even know who he was, but I just wanted to know more.
This is Live at the Hall from the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. This week's program explores the impact of DeFord Bailey, an influential harmonica player in both country music and blues, who was one of the Grand Ole Opry's most popular early performers and country music's first African-American star. To perform and discuss his musical legacy, here are Jake Groves, Jerry Pentecost, Molly Tuttle, Ketch Secor, and Carlos DeFord Bailey.
He was shorter than little Jimmy Dickens, but he stood tall on the Opry stage, standing on an old Coca-Cola crate. In the 1920s, he was the rage. Playing on his harp, the fox chase song, the bars and the house feeling real. A lonesome red of Pan American blues, like a night train pass over as of steel. When DeFord Bailey played his heart so sweet, it touched your heart and made you smile down deep. Oh, when DeFord Bailey died, a chorus of angels cried. A Tennessee born and a God-given talent can't be kept down, not for long. Friends like Roy Cuff and cousin Manny Pearl helped him find the stage to play his songs. A pioneer of the Grand Ole Opry, among SP's first to record. Fans start coming to Music City to see him making him the highest award. When DeFord Bailey played his heart so sweet, it touched your heart and made you smile down the road. When DeFord Bailey died, a chorus of angels cried. The DeFord Bailey family thanks a long-time elder, Dr. Charles Wolf, Dave Morton, Archie Allen, James Talley, Ed Benson, Tammy Genovese of the Country Music Association, the Grand Ole Opry, and WSM Radio in Nashville, Tennessee. When DeFord Bailey played his harp so sweet, it touched your heart and made you smile down the road. When DeFord Bailey died, a chorus of angels cried. When DeFord Bailey died, a chorus of angels cried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
The Legend of DeFord Bailey, indeed. Well, Mr. Bailey, you have the distinction of being DeFord Bailey's grandson and namesake, and we just heard the song you wrote called The Legend of DeFord Bailey. Could you tell us the story of writing that song? What inspired you to write it, and how did it come to be?
Well, my guy that I used to deal with done all my mandatorial work, and he heard me singing along around the Legend one day. He said, we're going to write a song. Mr. Ron Deeney, that was actually my manager. And so he and we sit down. I tell you, we wrote that song, I guess, about 2 hours.
Really?
And we had it recorded at Jay's studio. And Jay was my producer at the time, Jay Verne. And turned out great. I mean, I love it. And do you like it? Yeah. Thank you.
What was it like, Mr. Bailey, growing up in a family whose patriarch was the harmonica wizard? And do you remember the way your grandfather influenced the family where music was concerned?
Well, I tell you, he was quiet. Granddaddy, he would sit around the house when he would come over. He basically was a holiday guy, birthday guy, you know. And he would really influence you to, you know, he said he was always telling me I come from a musical family. His family, down the third generation of the, back then in the 1800s, well, his dad was a fluent harmonica player and banjo and fiddler player. And so he would really encourage you, whatever you would like to do, if you're going to play music or whatnot. And everybody asked me today, well, how did you start shining shoes? And I'm going like, I used to have, my granddad had a very popular shop here on 12th Avenue. And so I had to go over there every Saturday morning, whether I want to or not. And my dad would wake me up. Your granddaddy wants you over here to shine some shoes. And I say, well, I wasn't shining. I was prepping shoes, but I got that fit to say. But he would influence you just to do whatever you want to do. And he encouraged you. He said, if you like and love what you're doing, you never work hard a day in life.
So he really shared that love of music with the family?
Absolutely.
That's wonderful.
Right.
Well, Ketch, I want to turn to you for a moment. You lead the band Old Crow Medicine Show, and you play a lot of instruments in the band: banjo, fiddle, guitar, harmonica. What drew you to the harmonica specifically?
Well, the harmonica is really one of the first instruments I learned to play, and I learned to play the harmonica when I was about 11 or maybe 12 years old. I just loved the versatility of having an instrument that could fit into your pocket, being able to take it anywhere. And gosh, you know, I grew up in the South, but I certainly didn't hear a whole lot of harmonica players because I listened to a lot more Michael Jackson than that. Mm-hmm. But when I found myself down at the music store with about $20 to spend, with money that I had made in my first job, which was shining shoes in a barber shop, I spent my money on a harmonica. And I always felt akin to DeFord Bailey for that reason. Shoe shining and harmonicas were something that came to me young.
It's kind of remarkable how your musical beginnings are so similar to DeFord Bailey's. What about DeFord's music has inspired you, and what does his music mean to you as a
Well, I
band
just
leader?
love the folks who built this country music thing that we love here in Nashville. And when you go up into the museum later on today, you're going to see some wonderful things. But my favorite part of the museum is at the very beginning. There's a case, right as you get off the elevator, you'll see it, and it's devoted to the story of the African-American influence on country music. You know, this instrument comes from Africa, and this is the very origins. This is the instrument, the banjo, that really started the whole thing, and the confluence created when this instrument met the fiddle, which is an instrument that shares origins like mine from Western Europe. The banjo shares origins from Western Africa, and together the fiddle and the banjo make country music. So you're going to really get a chance to see that. DeFord embodies that part of the story, and I just love DeFord Bailey.
Yeah. And, you know, DeFord, I learned recently that DeFord Bailey was the first person to perform on what is now known as the Grand Ole Opry, and he's integral to that origin of contemporary country music that you talk about, Ketch. What about DeFord's playing stands out to you, and how does his creativity sort of influence your own?
You know what was so special about Carlos's grandfather is that he had this amazing set of ears. When he was a kid, growing up in Smith County, Tennessee, about an hour east of here, but at that time would have taken 4 hours by a car over rough roads. He had a great set of ears, and all of the sounds that he heard on the farm, he learned how to mimic. So if he heard a fox chase or a train whistle go by, he would sit there. And the other thing for you guys to know, especially young folks, is that DeFord Bailey had a disease that was a terrible disease that affected a lot of young children at this time called polio. And he was bedridden for 2 years. He wasn't able to get out of bed. Now, that's how long it's been since the global pandemic. So imagine if, it's so cool that we all get to be together, but imagine if for 2 years you had to stay in bed. One of the things that made that more palatable for him was that he had that harmonica right beside his bed, and he could play, and he could hear the sounds around them and turn it into music.
Well, I know that Old Crow Medicine Show has a new record coming out this month, and I understand that there's a song that pays some tribute to DeFord Bailey in that. Could you talk a little bit about how the harmonica figures in the new Old Crow record and what we can expect to hear?
Sure. Well, Old Crow loves having harmonicas, and I want to introduce the newest harmonica player in the band, Jerry Pentecost.
And those y'all may not know, but Jerry is one of the most in-demand, well-respected, beloved drummers in all of Music City. But Jerry, I wonder, as a drummer, what drew you to the harmonica? What led you to pick it up, and what does DeFord mean to you?
Surprisingly, it's very similar to what Ketch said. I always like the idea that you can put it in your pocket. So, I played Bonnaroo a few years ago, and I had a harmonica with me, and I just carried it around everywhere and just blew it just for the fun of it. I didn't know what I was doing, but, you can't really carry a drum set and play it. I mean, you can, and people do it at Bonnaroo. I don't think that you should, but you can, so. It's just too hot. But yeah, so mine's in my pocket right now. So yeah, being in this band actually encouraged me to learn a little bit more about it, learn the technique, and Ketch is one of the best I've ever seen. So yeah.
Is there anything particular, Jerry, about DeFord's playing that speaks to you?
To me, it's about the melody. I'm a drummer, so I don't G, C, I don't play in notes. I play melodically based off of what I'm hearing and what I'm feeling. So and I feel like there's a lot of that in his playing. That you're not really so concerned with. People play the charts and the scales and stuff like that. I'm very, very new. I'm slightly newer to the harmonica, just a little bit more than you guys are. So, but yeah, I feel like all of the technical knowledge is really, really helpful, but at some point you have to, like Ketch said, you have to use those ears and you have to listen, and you just have to play, you have to feel. So to me, drums, it relates.
Gotcha. Well, I understand that the two of you co-wrote a song for the new Old Crow record with Molly Tuttle, and we have a special surprise for y'all today. She is twice named the IBMA, the International Bluegrass Music Association Guitar Player of the Year. She was the 2018 Americana Music Association Instrumentalist of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Molly Tuttle. And Molly has a new record coming out as well, or just came out. New record just came out, right, Molly?
Yeah, it came out 2 weeks ago.
Awesome, congratulations.
Thank you.
Crooked Tree, right? On Nonesuch?
Yeah, Crooked Tree.
Super exciting. Well, Molly, could you tell us about writing the song? We haven't even mentioned the title of the song. What is the title of this song that you all wrote together?
Yeah, it's called DeFord Rides Again, and Ketch and I started writing the song with just a riff that we had, and then he and Jerry wrote the lyrics. And I didn't know too much about DeFord Bailey before beginning to write the song with Ketch, and he had the idea to make it about DeFord's legacy, and it was kind of a learning experience for me to hear the song, and since then I've become a big fan and have just been so interested in his story, so it's great to be here today.
As a relative newcomer to DeFord's music, what inspires you about him and his playing?
I think he was a pioneer. I remember seeing a picture of him backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, and it's from the 1920s, and there's just an all-white cast with one African-American man amidst everyone, and that really struck me, and I didn't even know who he was, but I just wanted to know more, and I think he's an amazing musician, and his story is very inspiring.
Absolutely. Well, we'd love to hear the song if you don't mind playing it for us.
It's something of a great unveiling, has never been sung in public before, so our new record comes out next week. Our album is called Paint This Town. It's on ATO Records, and you can pre-order your copy now. And this song is Jerry's vocal debut as a singer. And so there's a whole lot of firsts with this song, like as we're about to play it for the first time.
DeFord was a man from Bellwoodton, played on that harp of night and day. How he wailed on them reeds till his lips would bleed, played till the Lord knows when. Just a little baby boy with a silver toy and a polio strike and fire wind. That 4'9", just one of his kind, the greatest there ever been. Blow, DeFord, blow. Play that Pan American. Whoa, where did you go? DeFord Bailey rise again. Arise, gals and gents, for the show to commence. There's a good-natured riot on the end. Little DeFord's on the loose with those must shows blues. Let the Jim Crow style beware. Like a fox chasing game, he was blackballed and shamed. Stripped out the silver from his head. Now it's welfare lines and dollars shine, singing, oh Lord, ain't I a man? Blow, blow, DeFord, blow. Play that Pan American. Where did you go? DeFord Bailey rides again. Can y'all do a little bit of that for me? Well, he played his last note in the banner they broke. Must have been those ice water blues. Now up in Greenwood you'll find a plot 4'9" for our city's biggest shame. They whitewash his name for that kind of sin. There ain't no excuse. Blow, blow, DeFord, blow. Play that Pan American. Oh, where did you go? DeFord Bailey rise again. Blow, blow, DeFord, blow. Playing up in glory land. Oh, where did you go? DeFord Bailey rise again. DeFord Bailey rise again. DeFord Bailey rise again.
Thank you.
What do y'all think it is about DeFord Bailey that is inspiring people to continue to now write songs about him and his legacy that he would live on in these songs?
Well, one of the important things about the story is that he was a member of the Grand Ole Opry, a founding member of the Grand Ole Opry. But then in the year 1941, is that when it was, Carlos?
Absolutely, yeah, 1941.
In the year 1941, he was asked to leave the Grand Ole Opry, and it's confusing why, and for those of us, what is the family's take on what happened?
Well, actually, we was pretty young at the time. As I grew older and learned more about my grandfather, I think it a lot had to do with the record labels like ASCAP, BMI, maybe convinced him not to perform some of his best songs that he wrote. And I seen a lot of older country music stars like Willie Nelson and the Man in Black, Johnny Cash. A lot of them wasn't able back during the early 1900s to record their own songs. And they had a lot of clashes with these different record labels. And so they was outlaws. And so it began where some of them kind of raised a little crackle hen. And so they was able to continue their recording sessions with actually releasing their own songs. And I really don't know about what it was that I think he actually left the Grand Ole Opry because of that reason.
I know, Mr. Bailey, in your song, The Legend, you mentioned that your grandfather was one of the very first people in Nashville to record. And Jake Groves, I know you've studied DeFord Bailey's recordings very closely. I'm curious to know, what drew you to the harmonica, first of all, and then how has DeFord's playing been important to you?
I first started playing harmonica as a Bob Dylan fan, so I had the harmonica rack, and after a couple of years of that, I started taking it out. Yeah, that's the neck holder there, and still use that from time to time. But I found that when you take it out of there, you can kind of wrangle it in a little better and do a lot more with it. But when I first heard DeFord Bailey, I'd probably been playing like a couple of years, and I've heard him on this compilation of old-time harmonica, and he stood out, just because there's so much vibrancy in how he played, and melodically, he was so clean. But beyond that, he was able to be a solo harmonica player because he was able to incorporate so much rhythmic playing, and we'll talk a little bit more about how he did that later, but definitely that stood out the most to me, how he was able to weave together the rhythm and the melody and just make the harmonica come to life.
Well, we can talk about that now if you like. I'd love to get your take on that. Like, maybe you could share with us what he did and a bit of how he did it to keep the beat. Because Jerry was talking about how he was also drawn to the melodic component, but there's also a groove component in there.
Right, so like there's a couple different ways you can, they call it an embouchure. It's basically how you put your mouth on the harmonica to make noise. And with one of them, you just use the lips. And so you could play something like, so that's a little line from one of the songs. Now, but he would play with tongue blocking. So you can add like chords to it like this. So
what does that mean, tongue blocking?
So that's, and we'll talk about this in the teaching portion, but that's when you physically are putting your tongue, like sticking it out and putting it onto the front of the harmonica. And so you can block off holes and hit individual holes. And so you can incorporate the rhythm in the melody, and DeFord is definitely still one of the best to ever have done that, bar none. And his music still holds up today, even after he recorded most of the recordings that I've studied were done in the 1920s. So that's almost 100 years ago, and people are still listening to him and going, "How did he do that?"
Well, I know, Jake, you're particularly adept at interpreting those recordings and sort of recreating them. We'd love to hear a bit of that.
Yeah, so I'll do, the first one is the fox chase, and so this is a tradition, and Ketch was saying that country is the blending of, West African and Western European traditions, and this is kind of another example of that. So the fox chase is, where they had the horns and the hounds and the horses in England, I'm sure we've all seen it in Disney cartoons, from back when. But it became a piece on the harmonica especially. And also there was elements of West African folk music, especially the vocalizations that made it into this. So this is, anyways, it goes something like this. I'll just play a short little bit of it here. Sicker. Ketch Secor. Ketch Secor. Thank you. So That was one of DeFord's big hits on the Opry. He played that quite often. And I heard mention of DeFord's own grandfather and his family's musical legacy, and he learned a lot of like fiddle tunes for the harmonica, which that in itself, anybody who's ever tried to play a fiddle tune on a harmonica knows there's lots of limitations to the instrument, and being able to work around those is tough, but he did it masterfully, so I'll try to play a little John Henry. This is probably one that he also played from when he was little.
All right.
It's like DeFord's with us. It sounds so much like him.
You should have been at the induction, man. Where were you?
Well, I'm sure.
We just met in a bar like 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Well, it was funny that you mentioned that. It felt like fate because I've been a huge fan of DeFord Bailey for most of the last 10 years, just trying to play these.
Molly was playing a concert in Louisville, Kentucky, and you were there, and you hung around after the show was over. Yeah. And you came up and we got to talking then, and I don't know how we got on the subject of DeFord Bailey, but I said, I've got this program coming up at the Country Music Hall of Fame. You sound like you might be a good candidate to come down to it.
I was pleasantly surprised to find that you were a fan of DeFord, and that there was this thing going on because like Molly said, she'd never heard of DeFord, and woefully few people know about his legacy and his incredible musicianship. So I'm glad we're getting to share some of that here.
Well, and that's really such an important part of the story, is that for whatever reason DeFord left or was asked to leave the Grand Ole Opry, this music that we play and that we celebrate in Nashville, Tennessee, is an open and integrated space of collaboration where folks that look like me and folks that look like Carlos have long come together to make a music that blends cultures.
Yes.
And DeFord embodies that probably better than anybody else up there in the rotunda that you'll see when you see who the members of the Country Music Hall of Fame are. And I was wondering, Carlos, if you could talk just for a minute about what it was like to be there when your grandfather was finally honored by Nashville's elite.
I was greatly, and with the medallion here, it was an honor. I'll tell you, I was doing a concert at the Wilson County Fair with the Grand Ole Opry, and it was this guy. I know the next morning that he was going to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame as well with Glen Campbell in Alabama. And so I see this young guy, older guy rather, is walking up and down the stage, because I walk a lot when I'm performing. And I'm going like, this guy's coming, I'm coming off the stage, and he touched me on my chest. He said, your grandfather lives through you, and it's crazy that his blood runs through your vein. And he said, you'll see a surprise in the morning. And so I'm going backstage, so I really wanted to know what the surprise was. And he whispered, he said, your granddad is going to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. I said, wow, I won't tell anybody in the morning because I wanted to be sure. But the next morning, I'm on my way out, and I will always get me a paper and a cup of coffee at the store. And I looked down, and it was printed. The next Grand Ole Opry inductees had DeFord Bailey, Glen Campbell, Alabama. I bought all the papers. The lady said, save me one. And I'm going like, well, what is it going to be? The first one was done on May the 7th in New York City, and then we did it here in 2005, right? And here's the medallion, and I greatly love and that it was passed down to me so we could keep the legacy of DeFord Bailey going.
That's wonderful. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you so much to Jerry Pentecost, Jake Groves, Carlos DeFord Bailey, Molly Tuttle, and Ketch Secor for joining us here today at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum to help us appreciate the harmonica and the influence of DeFord Bailey. Ketch and Molly are going to lead us in this song. I'm curious to know, Ketch and Molly, if you care to speak to it, why is this song so important?
Well, this song reminds us that you might think this about that or that about this, but when it comes to music, we're all drawn together into one circle. A circle that can't never be broken, so you can help us sing. Sky.